So in this week, we're really going to focus on insert, update, and delete statements. And these are called DML statements. So there's kind of three ways that they lump SQL statements. The first is DDL statements, which is data definition language. And the way I kind of like to think about it is data definition language is defining what our data is going to look like. So, we've spent a lot of time, if you're working on a final project or in the earlier weeks, we spent a lot of time looking at ERD diagrams. And that is really the definition. And so what I like to think about it, it's kind of like building a house, right? DDL statements or data definition languages is us building the house, right? And then data manipulation language, which is what we're going to learn this week, is filling the house and controlling what we put in there. So like what furniture, all of our kids' toys, books, that kind of stuff. Because maybe in each room it kind of has certain things. So the way I like to think about it is if I'm dealing with the structure, I'm using DDL statements. If I'm dealing with the stuff inside of the structure, I'm using DML statements. And eventually we'll learn the last one, which is DCL statements, data control language. But we'll get to that eventually. We're not going to worry about it too much right now. But all right, let's jump into some DML. So I'm going to start off by taking a peek at some of our stuff. So I have this database called Granny Book. So I'm going to select some information from these tables and just see what's in there, because it might have been a little while since I used them. So I'm going to select everything from recipe. Let's see what we got. And let's make sure we use the use command to tell what we want to use. All right. All right, so right now we don't have anything in here, which is probably, if you're working on a final project, it is probably pretty accurate to where you're at, which is kind of why I think this is perfect, because if you're working on your final project, this is probably where you're going to want to be if you want to be on schedule. Is we're going to start working on how do we get data into our table. So at this point, we should have an ERD diagram built for the most part. And now we just want to focus on putting some test data in, which are also going to fulfill part of your requirement for your CRUD statements, your test cases, and stuff like that. So you want to make sure everything you do, you save, which I'm going to go over here. And so we can save our code in what we call queries. So we can, or not queries, we can save everything that we put in here in script. So that way we can rerun it on the fly whenever we want to, with comments and all sorts of fun stuff. So that's what I'm going to do here. And I'm going to call this file seed.sql. And what seed means, you might see it every once in a while, but what seed means is that you're filling the tables up. So that's what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to fill my tables. All right, so I'm going to use Granny Book, which is really just a recipe book. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert some data into these fields so that I can have some test data. And what I'm going to do real quick is I'm actually going to reverse engineer really fast so we can see this. Next. The password here. And I'm going to do Granny Books. We can kind of see how this goes. And hopefully it's built correctly. I know I did this one manually. Oh, and of course it crashes. So let's try again here. Luckily it's saved for me. Tools, database, reverse engineer. Try it one more time. And if it doesn't work, then we will just go from there. Granny Book. Okay, that time we made it. Okay, so obviously not a complete model, and it might be somewhat basic, but we're going to roll with it. So this table should probably just go away. All right. So here you can kind of see kind of like this basic kind of structure. So we have a system user, which is, a user of our system. We have a recipe, which is kind of like the root of all this that's going on. And then over here, we have a recipe ingredient. So we can list out what ingredients go in our recipe. Then we have ingredients, and then we have an ingredient step. So you can kind of see the model here. It's a really simple model for the most part. We only have 5 tables, but I think it'll be really good to just kind of real quick demo what we might want to do with yours. So let's jump in here. So let's fill this in. So I always like to kind of just select from the table, just so we can kind of get an idea of what's going on and what we need to insert into. So now I'm going to go ahead and write my insert statement. And the insert statements are pretty simple. You just say insert into, and then you say the name of the table that you want to insert into. So in this case, we want to insert into recipe. And actually, we should probably start with system user. So that's kind of the trick, is you want to start at the base of your table. So you'll notice that I have user ID here, and I actually wouldn't be able to insert into recipe until I have a user. So let's go ahead and do that first. So let's take a look at our system user table. Oh, we do have one. And you can see that I have a email here, a username, and a password already built in here. So we're going to use that, but I'm actually going to take, just for the sake that we can make this rerunnable, I'm going to re-put it in there. So I'm going to insert into system user. I'm going to then list the columns that I want to put into. And since I always like to set mine to auto increment, I skip the ID column, which I would suggest. That way we just don't have to worry about it. So all we're going to worry about is this email, username, and password. So what I'm going to do is then say values, and then now I can actually put what I want to do here. So I'm going to do the same thing. Tanner@tannercrook.com. Username Tanner Crook, and I'm just replicating this data right now. We're going to do school rocks. And then from there, I'm going to delete my select statement so we don't have to worry about it. And there we go. So now I'm inserting a system user. Now, the other thing we can do is we can actually insert more than these at once, which if you're going to, you might as well plan on it because it just makes it easier. So I'm just going to put a comma at the end here. Take and copy this list, and I'm going to go ahead and put someone else in here. In this case, I'm going to do Frodo@shire.com. Frodo Baggins. And they vote for Mordor is his password. All right. Now I could run this right now and it would tell me that it inserted it unless I have a unique ID on my email, which I like to think that I would, because usually on our email passwords, we like to make those unique. Oh, and what do you know? I actually don't have it set to unique. I probably want that. So I'm going to just turn that on real quick. You can see that it's adding a unique index, which is great. That's what we want. And the reason we want the email to be unique is because we don't want people to be able to sign up for more than one account, or worse, have someone sign up with the email of someone else and have it be gone forever. So we're going to do that. Now, if I were to run this, it's going to fail because obviously there's a duplicate email here. So we're going to learn about another fun little command called delete, which is going to delete records from our table. So in this case, I want to delete from system user. And in this case, I'm going to say where user ID is not null. And this is basically going to delete everything, which In this case, I actually want, because what this script is going to be for me is a way for me to completely reset all the data in my database. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and it says that I'm using safe update mode, and to disable safe update mode toggle. Yes, so there's this issue. So let's try to turn this off. Toggle preferences, file, edit preferences, and SQL editor. And let's turn this off. So you can see that it's rejects updates and deletes with no restrictions. I'm going to turn that off because obviously that's a problem. Take and copy this just to make sure. Let's go ahead and reconnect here. Let's just try from here and see if it'll work. Is there a way to refresh this? Try again. Still not liking us, so let's close this, close this. Just close everything for now. And let's reconnect. Okay, perfect. It saved it for us. So let's try to run this again now. And use GrannyDB. Let's run our delete. There we go. So now we're working. So that's a safety feature to make sure you don't delete data intentionally. So one thing you want to be aware of is right now we're working in development environments, which is very different than actually administering a production database. Normally when we run production databases, you wouldn't want to use delete from system user where user ID is not null, because that would delete all your users. And at that point, let's hope you're running a transaction that you can roll back, or let's hope you have a backup. Either way, it's very nerve-wracking. So anyways, we'll talk more about that in future weeks when we talk about transactions. But for now, we're just working about we're talking about development stuff. So we're just building this willy-nilly. So I'm going to select everything from system user again, and we should see that that table is now empty, which is exactly what we want. So I'm actually going to leave this statement in here, and let's put a comment. I'm going to say delete existing records. And let's put a comment up here to make sure that we explain to people what this is for. This script will erase all the data and refill it with the demo data that tests the model. Do not use production. Something along those lines. Make sure we scare people from using it improperly if they want. All right. That's what that's going to do. It's going to just delete everything and refill it. There we go. So now let's run our insert. There we go. And now we should have our records there. There they are. We have my own account plus Frodo's. And that's kind of would be my rule of thumb, is I would kind of have two, in fact, we can put a select statement. Select everything from system user. I would put in at least 2 records per table. You might need more, as we'll look here in the future, but yeah, I would at least start with 2. Like for example, for the system user table, I would put 2. So now for our recipe, we're going to have a title. We're going to have a user ID. We're going to have instructions and created at. Insert into recipe. I'm not sure why that's freaking out, but we're going to just keep going here and hope that it fixes itself. All right, insert into recipe, and then our title, we want to be Tanner's egg omelet. Right, something kind of easy. User ID, I'm going to build a subquery here. Select system user ID from system user. I think it's just user ID. From user ID, where email is equal to tanner@tannercook.com. Right, that way if my account ID changes, it's not going to be a problem. And what I'm going to do, just to make this formatting a little easier, I kind of have my own little rule of thumb that because I don't want things to get too long. So sometimes I'll put it into a vertical format versus horizontal. You'll notice this when I did horizontal. That's because it's really small. But in this case, it's obviously going to be larger. So I'm going to keep things kind of small, or keep them, shrunk down vertically. So that way we can see everything we're doing here. So that'll get our user ID. Next, I'm going to get some instructions. So in this case, I'm going to say, put the ingredients in a mixing bowl. Gain its respect with a whisk. And put it in the pan and cook until desired level. Something simple. We're just going to keep it simple. All right. And then finally, our created at, let's see if we can leave that blank. And we'll just put current timestamp there just to be safe. Cool. All right, so let's give this a shot, see if we work here, and sure enough, we do. So I'm going to move this, select everything from up there down here. And there we go. Now I have my recipe. Now, again, I want to make this rerunnable. So I'm actually going to build this so it can be run over and over. So I'm going to say show results. And here I'm going to say seed delete existing. So let's delete from recipe. Believe it or not, we can actually just have it say delete from recipe, and we don't need anything more, and it'll delete everything. So that's what I'm going to do. And then we can re-put it in. So that will kind of be how our script works, is we can just recall this whenever we want. So let's say we're testing, and all of a sudden say, oh, like I added more records. I just want to wipe everything and restart. We can do so. Pretty easy. Show results. So there we go. Okay, we're moving along here. So let's take a look. We got recipe. Let's do an ingredient. Let's select everything from ingredient. We don't have any ingredients. So let's put those in. I might get sloppy with my comments because I'm just going to try to hurry a little bit faster. So let's delete from ingredient. Then we're going to seed, insert into ingredient. And this is where I got to think about how I actually make my omelet. This one's easy. We just have a name, right? So pretty easy. And let's see, what do we want? Obviously, we have eggs. Milk, cheese, salt. And Don't judge me. I don't know how to spell cilantro off the top of my head, but that's what we're gonna go with. We're gonna throw a little cilantro on our omelet. Ooh, and I forgot to.
It just starts with a C.
Does it? Okay. Thank you. Like that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then I almost forgot the most important ingredients, which is ham chunks. I'm just gonna say ham. All right, so let's go ahead and insert all those and then show our results. There we go. So now we have some ingredients. Now the ingredient table just holds like, base ingredients. Normally end users wouldn't even be able to add ingredients because they're just there. And then finally we want to add, let's say, let's take a look at our recipe ingredients. So show results, select everything from recipe ingredient. And this one's empty as well. So let's delete, and we're going to delete from recipe ingredient. And then we're going to seed. We have recipe ID, ingredient ID, and quantity. Now, what I'm doing here is actually going to be part of your deliverable, which is your CRUD statements, which is create, which is our inserts, read, which is our select statements, update, which we haven't done yet, and then delete. So, all these can be used for that. If you're working on your final project, can be used for that kind of deliverable. So you'll want to save these. And just so you know, for context, when we actually get to the final deliverables, the reason why we do these CRUD test case statements is because this is actually what users will be doing just through a user interface. In fact, like before this class, or maybe you did know, but most of us probably didn't know that when we make an order on Amazon or fill out a contact form online, we're really running an insert statement. So like, for example, like if I'm on a web page and I'm, choosing adding ingredients to my recipe, I'm really running these statements. The difference is like whenever there's a drop down in the user interface, we're going to use a subquery to kind of pull that information. And we're kind of hard coding it because we don't have the user interface to collect it. But hopefully maybe someday you can actually bring it to fruition if you want. So our recipe ID is we're going to select recipe ID from recipe. I don't know why I keep typing recipe from recipe where title is equal to Tanner's egg omelet. Is that what I had? Tanner's egg, 2 T's. I don't know if that's right either, but that's what I call it. All right, and then our ingredient ID. So this is where we can run another select statement, select ingredient ID from ingredient where name is equal to eggs. Or is it egg? Did I put eggs or eggs? Okay. There's something I'd think about in the future is, do I want the ingredients to be in the plural or singular form? But we're not going to worry about that right now. And then for my recipe, we put a quantity, in this case, 3. I'm going to put 3 of these. All right, cool. Values. All right, so this is kind of one singular thing. And just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to do this, and we're going to, normally I would probably, actually, you know what? I'm not. I'm going to keep this civilized. So this is, again, all up to you how you want to do this, but for readability, I'm going to go to my programming roots here and work like this. So Tanner's egg omelet, I'm going to do milk. And I never built this out all the way because I wanted to keep it small for reasons just like this. So I don't have to insert into it like, 12 tables. But, normally we would put like a quantity type. And you know what? Like, is our recipe ingredient? What is quantity type? Let's take a look at this table and see what quantity type. Quantity is a varchar. So I can actually put the measurement in there. So this actually won't work. We'll want to say 3. Just put large, right? And in this case, I'm going to put 1 cup. And let's capitalize it so we're consistent. All right. What else do we have here? Cheese. That's important. And normally I would say that we want to go overboard with cheese, but we've all got to be smarter about our diets. Getting older, so being more consistent. 1 tisp. And then cilantro and ham. One cup. I really like my cilantro. And then finally our ham. We're going to say 1 cup diced. Let's see if this works. There we go. Okay, and let's select everything from recipe ingredient. And there we go. Cool. So now we can see like, this, if we had more than 1 recipe, this would all kind of look very confusing. But when we bring it all together, we're going to be able to see our actual everything, really. So now let's do our last one. So I'm going to delete, and we're going to say delete from recipe step. We're going to show results just so we can see it for right now. Select everything from recipe step. And you'll find that once you get, since you guys are building your own databases, like you won't even need to select before, maybe you might want to. So we're going to say seed, and we're going to say insert into recipe step. Now I'm only going to put a couple recipe steps into this one just for the sake of time. Recipe ID, the sequence, which is the sequence is what order does it come in. And then we have instruction and an ingredient. Cool. We actually tie those together, which is awesome. Cool. Normally I would make it so the ingredient isn't tied to a single step. What I would do is I would say a step ingredient table so that you could have multiple ingredients tied to a single step. Like for example, mix everything in the bowl. I would probably want that to be everything, not just the one, but we'll deal. Just for the sake of time. What's cool is I can actually cheat and grab 2 of these. And just so you know, this is all just based on order. So where I just copied that over, like let's say just to make my life easier, I wanted to keep all this, so it's easier to copy. All I would have to do is take and move this around. And then I could put it in this order because then it's the recipe ID, then the ingredient, which is what I'm going to do in this case. So it doesn't have to match the table. It just has to be in the order that it's listed here. It has to be the order that you want to insert it is all. The sequence is going to be 1 and the instruction is going to be put eggs in bowl, and we got to be careful. Crack eggs, remove shell, and put yolk and whites in mixing bowl. Cool. And there's a recipe step. So now that I have this, I'm just going to take and copy this. Cilantro, let's change this to eggs before we forget. Milk. Milk to mixing bowl. Do another. And let's say now we want to add our salt. Like I said, I might not put all this in there. In fact, let's skip salt. Let's throw our cilantro last or third. Actually, what we want to do here is set this. I'm just going to take and copy another one. So for this ingredient, I'm actually going to set this to be null. So no ingredient. And I'm just going to say cook for about 3 minutes or until eggs are just starting to solidify. And I'm the type of person, because I don't want to burn my cilantro. So that's kind of why I do that. Just so you know, while we're sitting here making ourselves hungry. Add cilantro once eggs are starting to solidify. All right, there we go. And let's add one more step because we just got to add that cheese. Sprinkle cheese as desired. And then let's just add one more. We're gonna make this null. We're gonna say 6. Actually, no, we want this to be some cheese in there. We're gonna also link some cheese. Once eggs are cooked to desired texture, add cheese and cook until cheese to top and cook to the top, flip and cook until caramelized. Oh, that sounds good. I'm a breakfast person. That's really good. And now we have our recipe steps. Okay, perfect. So now we're kind of there. And so the final step is we're going to test results in aggregate. And this would be another CRUD statement. In fact, this would be the CRUD statement. So like if I click on a recipe, you know, imagine we're on a website and I click on a recipe. You know, what I want it to show me is like, oh, what ingredients are there in it? So let's say show ingredients list. So I'm going to select, obviously we would want the recipe name. So I'm going to say r.recipe, r.title. And then I'm going to select i.name. And then ri.quantity. From recipe R, inner join, recipe ingredient, RI on r.recipe ID equals ri.recipe ID. And then we're going to inner join that with ingredient I on ri.ingredient ID is equal to I.ingredient ID. And there we go. So now we can see all the ingredients that are in my egg omelet. All right. Pretty neat. And then now we're going to show the steps. So now we're going to select r.title again. We're going to select the rs.sequence. We're going to call that step. We're going to say rs.instruction. Is that what I call that? Instruction? Yes. If there's an ingredient, we want that. So I.name. And then, yeah, I think that's it. From recipe R. Let's go ahead and just steal this here while we got it. No need to reinvent the wheel. So there we go. Next, we're going to want the recipe step. So we're going to interjoin recipe step rs on r dot recipe ID is equal to rs dot. Now, one thing that I did do, if we actually want to take and instead of putting this here, we want to actually put it here. And the reason being is in this case, we want our recipe to be connected on the recipe step, not the recipe ingredients. There we go. And yeah, that should be it. Oh, I probably didn't do something right here. Let's take a look. Unknown column, ingredient ID. Oh, see, I kind of messed up here, I think. Yes, so this is supposed to be recipe ingredient ID, which really makes this more difficult. Okay, so this is why we do this, because I'm going to delete everything from recipe step, which is scary, but we don't actually have to redo everything. Yes, that worked. Okay, so all we need to do is say I and join this to recipe step. We're just gonna real quick make a couple alterations here. Yeah, this is getting complicated. Let's just keep joining this up. We want it. In fact, let's go ahead and make this look nice. Since we're going to replicate this. Okay. There's our eggs. This one is milk. So I'm just going to real quick just replace these. That one's null, which makes it easy. Our cilantro. And our cheese. And our skin. All right, so I'm going to rerun this. Oh, and it's title. It's where it's nice to have a VS Code because find and replace is really important sometimes. All right, we're getting there. Perfect. Let's hope this one goes up. Unknown column rs dot ingredient ID. Did I put the wrong thing here? Oh, and I messed up again. Okay, so we're going from an ingredient to a recipe ingredient. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to keep calling that RS. The alias is still going to be RS, but it's going to work. It's just going to save me time so I don't have to fix all the aliases. And the other thing I need to do is change one last thing. Okay, there's that. And the last thing that I need to do is instead of selecting this ingredient ID is now going to have a problem. So I'm just going to say RS dot. So it gets recipe ingredient from, it gets the recipe ingredient ID. That's what we need. Yeah, let's hope this works. There we go. I think we're there now. Okay, so now we're going good here. Our recipe ingredient IDs are all filled. Perfect, because yes, we wanted to link to a recipe ingredient ID and not an ingredient ID to make sure that the ingredient exists in the recipe. All right, so we enjoin this on a recipe step. Then we interjoin a recipe ingredient RI on r.recipe ID is equal to ri.recipe ID. Because if we would go back and look at our model, we could see that ingredient isn't linked directly to the recipe step. It's linked to the recipe ingredient. And then we're going to join that on recipe ingredient. We already have our recipe step. So I'm going to say and rs.ingredient recipe step rs.recipe ID. Yep. And rs dot ingredient. No recipe step. Okay, let me think about this. So we have our recipe, we get all of our steps. Our steps are linked to recipe ingredient. So then we want to yes. Okay. So here we're getting our recipe. We're joining that to our recipe steps. So then we have all of our steps, and each one of those steps is linked to a recipe ingredient. And so in this case, we want our recipes ingredient ID to be equal to our recipe ingredient ID. And then we can get our ri.ingredient. There we go. Sorry. That was way more complicated than what it was supposed to be. And in this case, since we are really wanting these in steps, we're going to say order by rs.sequence. So that way we can make sure they stay in the order of number of steps. So now if we look at this, we can take a look. So obviously the name of our recipe. Step 1 is crack the eggs, remove the shell, and put the yolks and whites in a mixing bowl. And our recipe name, let's make this a little cleaner. There we go. Now, so our ingredient is eggs. Add milk, add cilantro, perfect. Sprinkle cheese. So there we go. Okay, that was a little bit of work around there. But anyways, hopefully that gets you the idea. We showed a create statement or an insert statement. We showed select statements, which we've already known. I'm going to demo an update here real quick, and we've gone over delete statements. Because our delete statements, they just delete everything. Normally you'd want to put a where clause so you don't delete everything, but in this case we put a lot without just because we're wiping them clean. But let's say that we want to update an instruction. So like, let's say I see this sprinkled cheese is desired. I don't want people to think like, oh, put all your cheese on there. So I want to limit that, add a little note to say, save some for later for caramelization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to update the recipe step table, and I'm going to set the instruction equal to, and I'm going to actually cheat just a little bit, and I'm going to concatenate this. So I'm going to say concat is concat. Let's make sure concat function works. I'm going to concatenate that with if you want caramelized crunchy cheese on top, save some for next step, or maybe we'll want to add step, save some for later steps, something along those lines. Now, if we were to run this just like this, it would actually update all of our instructions and the whole table to be equal to this, which we don't want. We want to save this. So we're going to say where recipe step ID is equal to, and in this case, the recipe step is going to be, and we actually don't know. In this case, just to make things simple, I'm just going to say where sequence is equal to 5. So normally we would want to put more in here, but since we're just doing a quick one, we can do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this. And now if I go ahead and rerun this, we should see that our stuff is updated. So basically I just add a little bit to our instruction. Now for our update statements, you can actually get kind of crazy, and you can even do joins in there because like, let's say we wanted to join that to make sure that we got the right recipe and all that kind of stuff. We can do that. The other thing to be aware is you're writing your select statements. Like, so in this case, you'll notice I used all inner joins. So if we ever had a recipe that didn't have any ingredients, which would be a weird recipe, it'd be called air. I wouldn't show those, which in this case, I did that by design, but just something to be aware of. You want to make sure your joins are adequate for what your business logic is or what you want to permit. All right. So that's this. I hope that helps not only with the just overall stuff for reading, updating, deleting. The other content that you'll see in this week is a bunch of functions about with data types. I don't cover those too much because a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory, and there's just a lot of them. In fact, most of the time I still look up functions unless they're ones I use frequently. So that's why I don't cover those too much. Does anyone have any questions about this kind of stuff before we jump into, because we're going to jump into and review some people's models to go over them, to provide some feedback, if in hopes that helps other people who are maybe in similar boats. So before we switch gears though, does anyone have any questions about this?
Did you purposely decide to use omelet for your CRUD demonstration?
I made an omelet this morning, and they're pretty simple. I think, in the past I've done cereal, because that one's also simple because there's only 2 ingredients. There's cereal and milk. So, so yeah, I picked the omelet just because I made one this morning.
I have a quick question about the created at column.
Uh-huh.
When you set that up, is it a date or date time? And then how do you do the default expression or
Yep, good question. So I think that was under recipe. Yes. So this created at, there it is.
oh, it's called timestamp.
Yep. So I do a timestamp, and then you can set the default to be current timestamp. And what that allows us to do is when we're doing our insert, it lets us skip that column. So like on our system, here on our recipe, if I really wanted to, where that's already set, I could just take that out of the insert statement. And what that'll do is I'll just do Tanner's omelet too. It'll still work, and it'll still put the current timestamp in there, which is really nice, because a lot of that stuff, you want the data, but you don't want to be bothered by it. Like, because even when you program like your back end, like if you're actually building the web page, it becomes tedious if you're constantly having to map variables or set them. And so sometimes it's easiest just to say, hey, database, like when I create this, obviously I want it to be at the time the created at column is going to hold the time that, you create the record. So just always set that to current timestamp.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. Yep. Good question. I'm going to go ahead and throw that back in there though, because I'm actually going to save this. So the last thing before we switch gears is I'm going to save this script as seed grannybook.sql, and I could put that, like, I'm just going to put on my desktop for right now. But now what we could do is we could then, I could delete everything from this and rerun it, or like, I'm just going to go ahead and click this button, and I did this backwards. So the other thing to be aware of, because I delete from system user first, it has things that depend on it now. So like the recipe, you'll notice that it failed because it says cannot delete or update a parent row, foreign key constraint. So really what you have to do is you have to put all your deletes in reverse order, which is really interesting to plan out. I usually just kind of do something just like this, where I kind of build them in so I know my order, and then I just go in reverse here. I think this one will need to go, this one can go for this one. All right, so now we should be able to run this whole thing. Nope. Ingredient. Oh, ingredient probably needs to be the last one besides system user. Bring this up. So that'll wipe everything clean. And there we go. So I could click this button as many times as I want, and it's going to rerun everything in here. So that way, when I get to the bottom, I always end up with the final result, but it actually deletes everything and recreates it, which is really nice. And we'll actually be able to tell that because of the, because we delete everything. Okay. So that's enough of that. I'm going to go ahead and save this script so we keep it for later. And that's what I would recommend you do whenever you do something like this, kind of format it in a way, because at the end, if it were me, I would keep this so you can use any of these kind of statements that you've already gone through the work to create. You can keep them, but also, it's just proof of your work, so you can submit it with it anyways. That's what I would do. All right, so let's swap gears. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to open a model, and let's go look here. It is, I can't remember where I put that. I know it's here somewhere. So let me find that model here real quick. And okay, so it is this one. Let's just open this. All right. So this is Chris's model, actually. And Chris, you can feel free to jump in. It's for a add-on to Discord, or a bot for Discord, I guess I should say. And so we're going to kind of go through that and do it, take a look at it. So I've kind of already taken a look at this and kind of have noticed a few things, but I thought it would be really helpful because, it's kind of hard the hardest part of this is visualizing how it's all going to end up at the end of the day. But I think these kind of exercises help maybe find things that you can look for. So in this case, if you think about Discord, and this is kind of how I viewed it, and again, jump in, Chris, if I'm butchering something, but the way I kind of started this, as soon as I kind of realized, oh, this is for Discord, like a messaging system, my head went straight to Discord. Kind of messages is kind of like the root of this. So I kind of started there, and I said, okay, let's look at this. What, we can embed something in a message, and make sense. We can have reactions to a message. And messages go in a channel, and those channels then belong to a server, and users are assigned or can have specific servers. But the one thing that I kind of noticed is that based on this model, because you'll see, this is where ERDs are nice, because we can really quickly see the layout of this. We can see here that here, and I'm going to just kind of swap some of this stuff around here just so it's all. No, that's not what I wanted at all. For some reason, it's not letting me do that. So we're just gonna. All right. So we have our various little pieces of the puzzle here. So based on our message, the only thing that our message is really tied to is a channel and then its own kind of stuff. So I kind of like to compartmentalize just a little bit. So we have a reaction that a message is tied to, and that reaction then goes through its own little, reaction kind of workflow. And over here, we have kind of like our user stuff, and then we have a server. But just a couple things here to keep in mind. So the first thing that I noticed is, our messages, we probably want to know who sent the message. So the first thing that, that's kind of one of the first things that I kind of saw. And even though there's a path, because what's hard is sometimes there is a valid path to a message, or to a parent table. Like, for example, if we wanted to know the message that this field is attached to, we can do so. But the key is it all depends on these little crow's feet and which way they're going. So in this case, like a channel is a one-to-many relationship, meaning that, for every single channel, we can have many messages. In that kind of way, we can go backwards, because you can see here we have our channel ID, so we can push back here. And, oh, because a server can have many channels, okay, if we're at the channel, we can see which server it is. So at this point, from the message, we could know which server that message belongs to. Now, where this kind of gets, I guess, broken to connect it to which user sent the message is this right here. You'll notice this changes directions. A server doesn't have many users, or sorry, a server does have many users right here. But at this point, we lose our, because you'll notice that we've been going crow's foot to single, and this one's single to crow's foot. And that's where we kind of lose the ability to tie it to a single user, because a server has many users. A user doesn't have many servers, if that makes sense. Which we're going to fix. So kind of what I would do here, because we want to attach this message to a single user, I'm actually going to just connect message straight to a user. So I'm going to add a user ID. Let's make this an int. I'm going to set it to be not null. Oh, and the other thing, we'll want to make sure that these are not all primary keys. We just want those to be foreign keys. I'm going to set that to auto increment on the message. So this user ID, we want it to be a foreign key. And our user is going to tie to user ID. Perfect. And again, just to kind of reiterate what these do while we're here is if I delete a user, I want to delete their messages maybe, but maybe not. And, you know, in most cases anymore, we never delete data. So I would actually just not worry about it if it doesn't need to be. All right. And, you know, we could tie this to a user. We could tie this. The other option is we could tie this to user has server. It just depends. So let's actually just leave that as is for now, because there's a couple other things that I want to fix. So in the Discord kind of way of doing things, in this case, we're saying that a user can belong to many servers, because basically what this table is doing is it's saying that, oh, a server has many users. Basically, we're taking a server and we're attaching it to a user. And in this case, we do want to add, we're missing a primary key here. So we're going to say user server ID. Set this to int, not null. And again, we this one, we actually want the user server. This is going to be our primary key. And this one was our server ID. All right, let's auto increment that. Our foreign key, we're already tied up there. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. All right. So in this case now, we have this table that basically just connects and says, oh, who's members of the server, right? Now, one piece, and I don't know if we want this or not, but in Discord, you know, we can have servers, but either way, like this will go either. We can do this both ways, because from this we can see what server a user is a member of, and from the server side we can see who's a member of that server. So that will work just fine. We can leave that as is. All right. Yeah, let's take a look here. So now our user is tied to a message. Now, as going back, we can tie directly to a user here, or we can tie to a user has server, because the last thing that I want to kind of get fix over here on this side is, instead of connecting this to our user table directly, so I'm actually going to delete this key, because users don't inherently own a level, if that makes sense, unless you're talking about, and Chris, maybe you can, are you talking about role I guess that's server roles, right?
I was in that particular table for level. I put premium level at first, but then I changed it to user level. And
Got it.
it would be for, and if to future proof it, I put it in its own table just in case, like if it becomes a premium user. But what if we want to add a pro or an enterprise? I mean, that's just like to go crazy with it, to make its
Got
own table. So we'd have columns for additions that we could add later.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. Okay. And a couple other questions here. So this reaction role,
Mhm.
what, because I guess like in this, I haven't really thought it through. But like normally I would say that a user just like makes a reaction. Like, is there like, why do we have a reaction role table?
So a, a potential future feature for this bot would be the ability to, and other bots do it, would be the ability to, in like an announcement or a channel set up for like new people for onboarding purposes, they react with a smiley face to get a specific role, or react with this to get X role, X smiley face to get X role. So then it puts them in a particular category or a channel that they have now have access to,
Okay.
or just to show they're interested in something.
Got it. Perfect. Yeah. So that makes sense. So I'll leave that alone because that makes sense.
I do have a question about that specific table though.
Okay.
I noticed that there's a server ID because it gets routed through this. It gets routed to the server in two different ways. So there's a server ID that's an int, and then a server ID 1. Is that okay?
Yep. Yeah. You can connect to both of those. So it'll actually, so it looks like we don't have these connected. So we can just say server ID and server ID 1 is gonna just like that. Yep. Completely okay.
Okay.
Yep. So that'll work. Like, I don't know the purpose behind that, but I guess I don't really need to. But it is possible. Like, you know, if you wanted to link, basically this could possibly link two servers together. Is basically what that would do.
Okay.
Let's see. And then the other thing I was going to add, because the one piece that I knew was missing from this reaction, again, this is just like bonus, but one of the thoughts I had is, we might want to know who performed the reaction.
Yeah.
And so in that case, I'm just going to go over here to columns, and I'm just going to add a user ID column. And that user ID will just link up to the user table. And then that way we can know exactly who made it. Action ID. I don't know why that won't delete, but we're just going to pretend it's not there.
When do we use the solid lines versus the dotted lines? Like, how do we know which one to use?
You know, I was actually just wondering that. It actually builds them for you. So I'm not quite sure. I actually just recognize that myself. I'll be honest, because like I don't use Workbench entirely a lot.
Okay.
So I'm not quite sure what the difference is.
It says for the solids, if you mouse over the solid one on the left, or one in my case on the left, it says the solid is an identifying relationship and the dash is a non-identifying relationship. So I wasn't sure what that really meant.
Oh, let's see. So if I were to go into here and look at the columns, I think it's just because you have these marked as primary keys. That's probably why.
Because I chose the type of line to connect them. I didn't let it do it for me when I made it. So I just chose solid because I wasn't sure.
Yeah, so it looks like what's going on. So like in a lot of these tables, like you have the keys all marked as primary keys.
Oh, okay.
And really we just want one primary key,
Okay.
or it's going to try to combine them to make a primary key, which can be really weird. So
Okay.
I would just have like your table underscore ID be the
Mhm.
primary key, and the rest you can leave blank. Because we'll want those to be foreign keys. So
Okay.
that's kind of like my process is I create my ID column first, primary key, not null, auto increment.
Okay.
And then once you do that, because like as I'm doing this, you'll see that they're turning into dotted lines.
Yeah.
Basically, if two primary keys connect on each other, it's a solid.
Oh,
If it's a primary key foreign key relationship, which is really what we want, then it'll be dotted.
okay.
I mean, there might be a case where you'd want it. It's possible to have a primary key to primary key relationship, but that would be odd to me. So I would say, in fact, at that point, it becomes weird. So probably, I would let it kind of just put them in there. Cause that's what's nice is if we want this to build our SQL for us or forward engineer this for us,
Mhm.
we'll want to build those in anyways, like with the foreign keys.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can just do that. Perfect. Got it. And anyone who wants to is more than welcome to build them by hand. Completely up to you. I actually somewhat kind of prefer to build mine by hand. It just depends on what kind of a hurry I'm in. Just because in that way I have all the code I can see. I mean, you can have all the code this way too. So yeah, like at this point, this is looking pretty good. I'm going to save this so I can resend it to you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
I've been like trying to like quickly follow along, but you
Well,
were
like I
you were
said,
pretty fast.
I'll shoot this over to you so you don't have to worry
Yeah,
about
that's
it.
awesome.
But yeah, and what's cool is like once you're to this point, we can actually just go to forward engineer
Okay.
and and I would really look through all that, because I mean we can see the key connections. That's why I would just let it build the lines for me.
Mhm.
And then once we're there, we can forward engineer this and actually have it generate all of it for us. So, and what's cool is this is nice stuff to have too. So we don't want to skip any of these. Do not create user, blah, 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 drop. I am going to have it generate the drop schema and drop objects before each create statement, which I'll show you why here in just a minute.
Okay.
I'm going to have it omit the schema qualifier name and object names, which is really nice. And I'm going to have it generate use statements. Include model attach script. I don't know what that means, but sure. This is going to do is I'm going to export the table, which is all we had. So that'll be good.
The include model to attach script was basically saying that you'll be able to tell that the script is connected to the model.
Got it. Okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then this is nice because what I would do here is just save this to a file. And then I can just call this, I'm going to save it to my desktop. I'm just going to say, call that. And really what my naming convention is I like to call this schema. So normally I would have it be like the database name dot schema. And then that way we know like, oh, this builds the tables. Cool. And then at this point I can just close this and then I can say file, open model, or not open model, file, Open. I don't have like just like a, maybe I can just open it. No. Okay. We'll just open. Oh, I bet you it's because I'm in a model thing here. So let's go here. I'm going to say file, open SQL script, schema. And then what's cool is I can really quick just like rename the schema. That's why some of those options are there. So like if I wanted to just rename the schema to this. And I had it not show the qualifier names, and then I had it drop the table, so that way we can rerun it over and over and over again. So I'm actually going to try to run this, and this is something that's because like this will help you find issues with the model. So it said failed to add the foreign key constraint, missing index for constraint FK message 1 in the reference channel, in the reference table channel. So then I could go here, open up my model and say, let's take a look at our foreign keys, you know, and it was missing something, which it looks like it has the server one, but it doesn't have the, see, it has server. Anyway, something, you know, obviously is upset about something there. So, oh, and it's probably, yeah, I'm have to look at it, but then you can go through that and fix those one at a time.
Okay.
Should get you there. In fact,
Awesome.
let's take a look. Failed to add missing index for constraint. And this is where it's nice to go and look at this. Channel. So this one right here, this little index, that's what was causing that issue. So we could delete that. I go back here, click this and go to indexes and just delete this guy right here. In fact, let's delete this. Go. Here's one references server. Anyway, so you can go through, fix that, regenerate your SQL, and you know rerun it as needed.
Okay.
Cool. It's just you and David in here now, so I don't think there's anyone else who wants to check any. I didn't have anyone else send me models. I don't believe. Let me check though really fast, just to make sure before we go. Yeah, I think that's it. So unless you guys have any questions, we will call it good there. Yeah,
Any
hopefully,
comments on mine?
let me, oh, did you send yours? Let me check.
I sent it with the assignments because I wasn't sure where to put it because my computer's different.
Got it. Okay. Let's see. So you sent it via email or?
I sent a picture of what it looks like currently, and I'm just wondering your advice and suggestions on that.
Okay. And did you send that via Canvas or Teams or email?
Canvas, I think.
Okay. Yeah, let me get along. You put that in an assignment.
Yes, for one of them, I put that in.
Let me look here. So it's probably under.
I have another school meeting to jump into, but thank you so much for your help.
Yeah, no problem.
See you, Chris.
Thank you. Yep.
I'm not seeing it anywhere.
Let me see if I can send it.
But no, yeah, it's all good. Formatting, or yeah, there's never a great way to line out all the tables, to be honest. Okay, let's take a look here. Let's see, shape input.
Some of those show one more on the bottom, so you can.
Yep, got it.
So this is just a first version. Just trying to figure out what I'm doing.
Got it. And percentiles, is that going to be an output after the analysis?
I think it's going to be processed in the middle. It's not like after or before, it's kind of in the middle.
Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah,
That was a good question.
what I would do here is to kind of tie all this together. So let's call this a I'm going to leave some of it blank because I'm just not sure how far crazy we're going to go here.
Some of these things I was trying to figure out how to do, but it just wasn't working the way I expected. Like it could check if it was linear, but it couldn't check if it was quadratic.
Got it.
Which is odd. So I'll have to refine that.
Yeah.
On some of them, I put default express slash expression, put a comment in there.
Nice. Okay.
I'm not sure which ones though. I forget.
Got it. Right now, table. What I would do is, so I created this system user table. I created this analysis table. The system user table is really just to kind of future-proof this in case you wanted to make, so multiple people could handle their stuff. So then what I would do is on each one of these tables, add an analysis ID.
Okay.
I'm not gonna bother. We kind of want all these, at some point, we kind of want a way to select all of our data, as it pertains. So by linking that to our analysis, and we'll also want a way to uniquely identify these. So the other thing I'm going to do is add a shape input ID. And basically we'll want to go through this process with every table and basically make that the primary key. It's like, I'm not 100% sure on the math here, but then I think what we'd want to do on this potential output. So like, I'm just going to like really, let's just focus on the shape for now, I guess. Because we have a shape input. I think we'd want to not only tie the shape output. Well, technically we could just tie it to an input. So let's just shape input ID. That an int. Have it be non-null. That'll connect the two, and then I'm going to do a shape output ID. There we go, and then this is going to reference shape input. There we go. Yeah, so I would go kind of through this process with all your inputs. So like in the data input, we can add the primary key. So data input ID, set that to be an integer. And then analysis ID, want that to be an integer. Oh. And then our potential output. And that's where I don't know where a lot of this stuff like connects in here. But you can see how we can kind of link the input to the output like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that way, if we ever wanted to say like, oh, for this analysis, this is what I input and this was the output, we could select that, or, we can kind of connect all of our data up together.
Yep.
Like for our p-value, we could say, make a primary key column.
And you notice there's the default expression on the one because I couldn't figure out where else to put it.
I got it. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure like how it all ties together, but I'm guessing that for our analysis, we return a p-value. And the other thing we'll want to be careful of is our columns normally can't have spaces.
Oh, that's good to know.
And same thing with the table names. So like the table names, like that's why I usually do underscores. So like this one.
So I should be doing underscores.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's kind of the
that's good to know.
MySQL
That's good to know.
default. And then data input, stuff like that.
When coding, I'm used to doing that. It's just when you're doing visual stuff, it's kind of like.
Yeah, for sure. And MySQL, there's different brands of SQL databases. The kind of correct context or syntax for SQL Server is camel case. But for MySQL, Postgres, and Oracle, it's all underscores. And even what's interesting is on SQL Server, it's camel case, but all capitalized first letters. So the first one, the first letter of the table name is always capitalized, kind of like objects, which I kind of like. I prefer that over the underscores, to be honest, but that's the way it goes, I guess. When you make your own database system, you get to choose.
Yep.
All right, yeah. So I would just kind of keep following that kind of structure, and you can get them all connected. Because yeah, I'm thinking like for your analysis, you're gonna input some data, and we want to connect that data to an output, and so on and so forth.
I kind of struggle with differentiating between the input of X and the input of a sequence, because those are similar enough that it's like.
Got it.
Yeah, I was just like, how do you go about that?
Yeah, and really what you could do is you could add a table, and I don't know what we'd want to call this necessarily. So I'm just going to leave it as table 1. But we could have something along these lines. We have a field ID and then a value, and obviously we want to connect this to really, and I'm going to call this field values. We can have field values and then
How would you represent a graph in here?
so really you wouldn't be able to, like, you could build, basically you could have a table called graphs and have like your different stuff, but really you're just kind of holding the data that generates the graph.
Okay. Okay.
Like in this case, so like, for example, in fact, we could multi-use this field table. So I'm going to call this the graph. And let's say graph ID. Graph type ID.
I didn't like the food there and
Like, for example, like if I wanted to do a basic, like, let's just say a line graph, no series, just, or let's just say a simple plot. I can generate all the data to kind of produce that graph, but I can't actually produce the graph here. So like I could have a graph that connects to, that's there. And then I could say like, let's get a graph fields.
I think you put yourself on mute somehow.
Oh no, sorry, I'm just
Oh.
being quiet, I guess. Like in the case of that of a graph, like if I'm just doing a simple scatter plot, for example, I might have I can give a graph a name. So like, let's say, for example, I'm just going to call it scatter plot 1. Its fields would have an X and a Y. So in the field table, you could have an X and a Y, and then we could connect this to field values. We'd have graph field, and then
So would it be easier to do the graphing stuff from Python and then bring it in?
up to you. Well, really, like the idea is that you put all the data you need for the graph in SQL, and then you pull that into Python and generate the graphs there.
Okay.
Really, the database is just for storing the data either before or after or both. Just however you want to build it.
Okay, so it's going to be a before thing, and then after I put it to Python. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Yeah. Because like you could always like say like, oh, like I want to store this data set up for future use. But yeah, like most of the time, like, I'll go run a query out of my database. So like, select everything I need and then process that in Python to produce my graphs.
Okay.
Yeah, that should if you go through that process, it should get you there.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Any other questions about the ER diagram?
I'm gonna be honest, like I don't fully understand it. Like I kind of understand the concept, but just like we talked about last time, there's like a lot of different ways to put it all together. So yeah, no questions, but as you keep building it, if you want me to take a look, more than happy to.
Okay. I will keep working on it.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Bye.